The fall of the Han Dynasty. The fall of Han is a wild story, but not a story often told. Similar to the Roman Empire, which existed at about the same time, the Han Empire had an enormous border to defend. As a result, it became plagued by barbarian invasions, which put a huge strain on the treasury, which weakened the effectiveness of the empire. But the most poisonous destructive forces came from within the empire. Powerful families hungry for power married into the royal family, murdered their competitors, and ruled the empire by controlling child emperors. They also murdered watchful Confucianists, followers of Confucius, who were tasked to call out the corruption in the government. Meanwhile, university students of the Imperial Academy bravely published lists of their favorite Confucian martyrs in protest. And then you had the eunuchs, who originally were just the guards of the emperor's harem, but they gained enormous influence as their castration made them loyal supporters of the emperor. They too had many influential Confucian scholars killed, and in time they even secretly abducted the regent empress and used her seal of authority to rule the empire. On top of all this, religious messianic leaders popped up all over the country, promising Taoist utopias and prophesying the end of Han. Under the leadership of Zhuo, they instigated a coordinated attack on the government with a huge peasant army known as the Yellow Turban Rebellion. Meanwhile, Commander He Jin called in the unpredictable general Dong Zhuo to defeat the eunuchs that had taken control of the capital. Before General Dong Zhuo had even arrived with his army, the palace at the capital went up in flames. In this lecture, we'll learn how all these forces conspired to end one of the greatest dynasties in world history, the Han Dynasty of China.
Hey, good to see you. This is Stephan, author of In Search of the Sublime. On this World History channel, we'll trace humanity's relentless pursuit of scientific truth, moral excellence, and enlightenment. We'll meet anyone from Mesopotamian astronomers and Indian yogis to Greek philosophers and Enlightenment scientists. And you'll meet them firsthand using primary sources, giving you valuable insights that transcend the surface-level understanding you get on other channels. Go check it out for yourself. Let's start.
The Han Dynasty can be divided into two periods. The first is now called Former Han, which covers the first 2 centuries BC, and the second one is Later Han, which covers the first 2 centuries AD. During Former Han, the capital of Han China was located at Chang'an, while during Later Han, the capital moved to Luoyang. And here we see those 2 cities in roughly the center of Han China. And up north, we also see the Great Wall of China, protecting the country from invaders from the north. During Later Han, Luoyang was the most populous city in the world, with an estimated population of 500,000 people. The city was protected by a wall and a moat. It also had 2 palaces known as the Northern and the Southern Palace, which were connected by an elevated covered passageway, allowing the emperor to move unseen between them. Luoyang also featured a temple known as the Bright Hall, 2 large hunting preserves, imperial tombs, and an observatory called the Spiritual Terrace, and also the Imperial Academy, where Confucian scholars were trained. Let's now go through some of the major players of Han politics. At the top, of course, we have the emperor and the members of his family. Just as in Rome, they continuously competed for power. Then there were the Confucian bureaucrats, who were trained specifically to critique the government to prevent mismanagement, which is one of the greatest achievements of the Han bureaucracy. And then there were the eunuchs, who were voluntarily castrated. Without the power to reproduce, they were believed to be trustworthy enough to guard the emperor's harem, where his women lived. As their castration bound them to the throne, they always sided with the emperor, making them very dependable allies. As a result, some later emperors rewarded them with high positions, which irritated the Confucian scholars, who claimed that those eunuchs did not have the best interest of the people at heart. And then there were the generals who fought the nomadic tribes at the border of the empire. And finally, you had all the rest, farmers, merchants, craftsmen, and also of course the unemployed. Let's now discuss what caused the fall of Han. In the 2nd century AD, a number of persistent problems began to weigh down the Han dynasty. Many of these problems would also plague the Roman Empire, which existed at about the same time. The most obvious problem was the enormous cost of protecting the border. The Xiongnu tribes regularly invaded from the north, and the Xiang tribes from the west, requiring constant border protection. Raids by these tribes also discouraged people from living near the border, which made it even harder to defend. And as China grew, defending that ever-increasingly large border caused the government to overstretch itself financially, leading to permanent shortages in the treasury. To help solve these financial troubles, the government began selling government positions. This contradicted the Confucian ideal to staff the government with men of merit. And as can be expected, the plan quickly backfired, decreasing morale and increasing corruption. With no money, the government also became less effective at meeting the needs of the people, making them way more likely to form rebellions. As you shall see, these rebellions were often led or inspired by messianic figures who promised religious utopias. And these rebellions were also fueled by the growing problem of income inequality. As the rich acquired more and more land, the poor often became landless and unemployed, which then pushed them into a life of crime and made them easily recruitable for rebel armies. As the government became less effective, it also began to lose its authority over the distant provinces. Here, locals often had to shift their loyalty from the emperor to local strongmen, which was considered a great sin in Chinese history, but it was just a reality on the ground. There were also many problems within government. First of all, every ruler in the 2nd century AD ascended the throne as a child and then died before the age of 40, causing great instability. When emperors died without a legitimate heir, which often happened, disputes regularly arose among powerful families over which person would inherit the throne. These families would also regularly murder an heir, just to get a member of their own family on the throne. On top of this, emperors of China often had almost zero contact with the outside world. And this was by design. Their distance from the people was believed to enhance their divine reputation. But this also meant that they have to rely solely on reports from officials, who then often added their own ideological spin to get their way. There was also a growing disconnect between the various branches of government. The aristocrats, for instance, supported extravagant projects and expensive wars to increase the power of the throne, while the Confucianists, on the other hand, prioritized the well-being of the population. And then there were the generals who risked their lives on the battlefield, but they were not understood by either party and were generally viewed with disdain. This was very different from Rome, where generals had much respect. Things truly got out of hand when the problematic Liang family attempted to take over. As the empire was starting to fall apart, many Confucian scholars risked their lives to combat corruption. In 142 AD, Emperor Shan invited the Confucian scholar Zhuo, who bravely explained that the abuse of power by those powerful families had led to corruption, which in turn led to resentment among the people. Zhuo then called for an investigation of the provincial administration, where he believed much of the corruption was located. Remarkably, the emperor, who could have easily killed him, responded favorably, establishing a special commission to report on the conduct of those provincial administrations. Together with the scholar Du Xiao, Zhuo even became authorized to remove dysfunctional administrators themselves. One member of the commission, named Jiang Gang, refused to visit the provinces, claiming that the greatest problems of corruption were located in the capital itself. Again, a very brave thing to do. He was especially concerned with the growing power of that Liang family. The scholar Li Gu agreed with this position. Emperor Shan appreciated their honesty, but he took no action, which proved to be a big mistake. When Emperor Wan came to power, he was too young to rule, and as a result, the regent empress Liang from the Liang family took charge, together with her cruel brother Liang, who became Marshal of State. Liang managed to persuade the regent empress to execute the critical Li Gu and to arrest Duke Chao, who later died in prison. Both their corpses were displayed at the capital as a warning. But these heinous acts against honorable Confucianists quickly backfired, giving rise to various demonstrations. Eventually, the eunuchs also began to feel uneasy about the power of the Liang family. The palace eunuch Xu Wang then pressured an astronomer to announce that certain bad omens, including an eclipse, pointed to Liang Ji's misconduct, which didn't end well for Xu Wang. In fact, Liang Ji had the astronomer killed. But this too backfired. It alarmed Emperor Wan, as the astronomer had been one of his main advisors. He then feared for his own life and began to check among the eunuchs who would support him against Liang Ji. When Liang Ji discovered the plot against him, he committed suicide, and members of his family were publicly executed. With this, the threat of the Liang family was averted, but it simultaneously increased the power of the eunuchs, who turned out to be even more problematic. Various Confucian scholars became martyrs to prevent their ascendance. In 160 AD, the Confucian scholar Li Yun wrote a memorial to the emperor criticizing the emperor's decision to give land to his eunuch allies. In response, Emperor Wan had Li Jian tortured. The courageous Confucian scholar Du Zhong then informed the emperor that in case Li Yun would be executed, he wished to die with him as a martyr. And so it happened. And again, their joint execution strongly backfired on the government. Emperor Wan then tried to repair some of the damage he had done by reinstating their scholar Chen Fan, who had been a supporter of Li Yun. And courageously, this Confucian Chen Fan continued to criticize the government, but was nevertheless allowed to rise to the highest rank in the Confucian bureaucracy. Inspired by the deeds of these martyrs, the students of the Imperial Academy openly picked the sides of the Confucian scholars. They even published lists of what they deemed to be the greatest Confucian martyrs. But the rise of the eunuchs had only just begun. The Confucian scholar Do Wu had taken Liang Ji's place as the Marshal of State of China. Together with Chen Fan, he openly expressed concern for the growing influence of the eunuchs. Do Wu even managed to convince the regent Empress Du, his family member, to put several dysfunctional eunuchs to death, but Do Wu's actual plan was to get rid of them altogether. When the eunuchs discovered this plan, they swore to destroy him. With the court in total chaos, General Zhang Huan arrived at the capital. Not sure what was happening, he picked the side of the eunuchs. And then with the army against him, Do Wu, the Confucianist, committed suicide. The eunuchs would later display his head at the capital. Meanwhile, one of the eunuchs had seized the empress's seal of authority, allowing the eunuchs to illegally issue government edicts. The Confucianist Chen Fan then broke into the palace in an attempt to stop this, but he was killed in the process. From that moment on, the government was firmly in the hands of the eunuchs. More than 100 Confucian scholars were put to death, and many others were removed from office. The Confucian scholar Cao Lun courageously urged these Confucianists to be reinstated to their position, as he claimed they were among the worthiest men of the empire. But for this, Cao Lun was also executed. Sensing the political instability, the people of China then came under the influence of prophets promising religious utopias. Starting in the 160s, various messianic figures appeared who promised to initiate a utopian period to succeed the Han Dynasty. The element fire or red associated with the Han Dynasty, they claimed, would soon give way to the element earth, which in China was associated with the color yellow. As a result, they often associated themselves with the Yellow Emperor. Other messianic figures picked Wang Lao as their hero, who was a popular Taoist deity who had incarnated, according to their beliefs, both as the Yellow Emperor Wang Di, that's where the Wang part is from, and the Taoist sage Lao Tzu, which contained Lao, and together they became Wang Lao. The government did its best to suppress these movements, but they kept on spreading, becoming more and more popular among the poor people. In 184 AD, these movements morphed into peasant rebellions. One influential movement was the 5 packs of grain, whose members were obliged to give a certain amount of grain to provide for the community. At their height, this organization even managed to carve out a small theocratic state within China. But the largest and most influential group was called the Yellow Turbans, who wore yellow caps in reference to the Yellow Emperor. They were led by the Taoist healer, Zhuo, who encouraged his disciples to confess sins and drink charmed water as medicine. He also believed in a utopia called the Great Peace or Taiping, and also believed in a prophecy that Han would fall in 184 AD. His movement gained hundreds of thousands of followers, whom Zhuo recruited to form a large peasant army set to cause uprisings all over China. Zhuo then picked a date for the attack, but the plan leaked and orders were sent for his arrest. He then decided to attack ahead of time, causing an enormous death toll on both sides. But eventually Zhuo was captured and was beheaded, and his head was sent to the capital. Then it was discovered that some of the eunuchs had been in contact with Zhuo, weakening their position in the government. 5 years later, He Jin, the brother of the empress and also the commander of the Northern Army, set out to remove the eunuchs once and for all. To achieve this, he called his army to the capital. This turned out to be a great mistake, as the army was led by a man named Dong Zhuo, who was known to be difficult and had twice refused direct commands to hand over his troops just a few months earlier. Which, by the way, was behavior otherwise unheard of in Chinese history. Generals in almost all cases followed the orders given to them, which was definitely not the case in Rome. As expected, Dong Zhuo responded with enthusiasm to He Jin's plan, and he immediately asked permission to, quote, clear away all evil and wrongdoing at the capital. He Jin then became worried and sent orders for the army to stop. But Dong Zhuo disregarded the order and continued his approach to the city, halting only 20 kilometers from the capital. Hearing about what was going on, a eunuch, fearing for his life, then took his sword and cut off He Jin's head. Hearing there was trouble, the officers Wu Quan and Yuan Shi then entered the palace with their soldiers. The eunuchs then barred themselves inside the palace. And to get them out, Yuan Shu ordered the room to be set on fire. Eventually the door opened and all eunuchs inside were killed. But meanwhile the fire was spreading, burning the entire palace complex to the ground. With He Jin out of the way, General Dong Zhuo outside the city took his chance. Waiting 20 kilometers from the city, he saw the fire rising over Liang, and then he decided to march into the city. He then deposed the emperor and set the emperor's younger half-brother, Liu Qi, on the throne, and then made himself the effective head of government, as Liu Qi was still too young to rule. And with this act, the Han Dynasty had effectively fallen. As Liang was a long way from the homeland of Dong Zhuo, he shifted the capital back to Chang'an, the capital of former Han, and he took the emperor with him. And on their way out, they looted and destroyed Liang. The Grand Imperial Library of Liang went up in flames. A politician named Wang Yun then tried to save as many books as he could, but he only managed to retrieve 70 wagons filled with books, whereas 2,000 wagons were required. The majority of the books that he could save from the fire were then further damaged and destroyed by heavy rains. But then back in Chang'an, Dong Zhuo was killed by his own men, And then quite brilliantly, Emperor Liu Shi managed to bluff his way out of the city, ordering the guards at the city gate to move aside for the emperor, which they did. But the Han Dynasty could not be saved, as new strongmen were on the rise across the country, including the great warlord Cao Cao. Cao Cao managed to establish his own state. He captured Liang, including the emperor, whom he then used as a puppet ruler to legitimize his authority. Cao Cao then hoped to conquer all of China, but he did not succeed in doing so. He had to share the land with two other warlords, starting the Three Kingdom period. China was finally united once more during the Jin Dynasty, starting in 280 AD. And thus unfolded the story of the fall of Han. I hope you enjoyed this story and learned a lot. If you want to know more about the Han Dynasty or one of many other topics from world history, read my book In Search of the Sublime. You can buy it on Amazon or you can read it for free on worldhistorybook.com. See you next time.